Good afternoon. Welcome to the Thurston County Board of County Commissioners work session. It is Wednesday, September 27th, 2023, 2:04 p.m. My name is Ty Mentor, Vice Chair of the Board. Commissioner Gary Edwards participating through Zoom, and Commissioner Carolina Mejia is excused this afternoon. For public virtual attendance, you can follow along on the Thurston County YouTube channel, and we are live streaming.
Yes, we
Okay,
are.
very good. So we have an hour set aside for Thurston County Traffic Concurrency Management Program briefing. This is informational session. We have public works staff. And so straight to the county engineer,
Yes, I think that's a good plan.
Matt Unzelman.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Matt Unzelman, Thurston County Engineer. Joining me, county staff, is Karen Weiss, our Deputy Director, Becky Kahn, our Traffic Engineer, and we're lucky enough to be joined by Kendra Breland from Fairs and Piers. Today's presentation should be interesting for you. I do not believe we've ever briefed you on this topic. In fact, Commissioner Menzer, I believe you brought up concurrency and we're asking questions about it a couple months ago. Don't ask me what the venue was, but I know you brought it up. We're not looking for a decision today, but want to provide you an update on some of the work that Fair and Piers is working on. This will directly support some of our comprehensive plan updates in the future. So with that, in order to prevent stealing your thunder, I'll turn it over to Kendra.
All right, well, good afternoon, commissioners. So again, feel free to ask questions if they come up during the presentation. We'll do our best to answer the question. This is a pretty technical topic. Becky, how do I advance the slide?
It's the roller.
If you just
There you
use
go.
that.
Oh, the roller. Okay, great. Well, in terms of our topics today, there's just kind of three. One, we want to make sure that we're defining key terms. Again, technical subject matter and words matter. So we definitely want to make sure that we're all clear about the terms that we're using. And we wanted to talk about specifically your level of service policy. And in a few slides, we'll actually we'll define what a level of service policy even is. But we'll talk about some proposed changes. And then at the very end of the presentation, we're going to actually quantify for you kind of what would making these changes mean from the perspective of your county capital plan. So, oops, wrong way. Here we go. So key terms. First of all, in terms of key terms, we have four really critical ones for you today. First of all, long-range planning. So I think all of you are pretty familiar with that. Thurston County has a comprehensive plan. You're planning for growth over the next few decades, thinking about how many new households, how many new jobs are we anticipating in the county? How do we accommodate those? And so that's a process that all of your staff and you are deeply involved in. So from a transportation perspective, that's really something where we run the travel model, we do technical analysis, and kind of substantiate the findings that you're making within your long-range planning. Second piece here is level of service standards. So the state requires jurisdictions to essentially make a promise to the community in terms of how your transportation system will perform. And so, level of service standards, the state actually doesn't provide a ton of guidance in terms of what those level of service standards are. It provides a lot of flexibility to you as a community. However, there is a requirement that you actually write down what those level of service standards are, and that as a part of your long-range planning, in your comprehensive plan, you're actually thinking about how you're going to maintain this level of service standards over time. That brings us to our third term, which is concurrency. And that is a term that is very specific to Washington State. There are very few states in the United States that actually even have concurrency. Florida and Washington were actually the only two states that really had a concurrency policy, and actually Florida has moved a little bit away from it. So we are kind of on an island on our own. But what is concurrency? It's essentially you making sure that promise, the level of service standards, are maintained as you grow. So this is really just to make sure that we don't put level of service standards that are unachievable in our comp plans, but it's holding us accountable to say that, hey, if we say that we're going to allow this much delay on our roadways, or they're going to perform this way, that we're actually staying true to that promise over time. And then the last topic and it's not one we're gonna dwell on a lot today, is impact fees. But because the county does have an impact fee program, just always important to clarify kind of how that relates to level of service standards. So essentially, the state allows impact fees as a mechanism to help essentially have growth, help you pay for all that transportation capacity that you need to accommodate growth. And so, there is some relation to your level of service policy there. So those are 4 key terms.
You didn't
happy to stop.
mention the second sentence under concurrency, which seems to be like super, super, super important. Development first needs to pass concurrency review. Can you explain that?
Oh, thank you. Yes. So when the county approves growth, one of the first steps that needs to be taken is that essentially at the county level, you guys are making sure that there's capacity in place to accommodate that growth. And the state kind of gives an interesting definition to what in place means. It means either it's on the ground today, it's providing that capacity, you're able to maintain your level of service standards, or you have the needed improvements programmed into your 6-year capital plan. So it does give you a little bit of a 6-year flexibility. Does that answer your question?
It does a little bit. I guess and this is mainly just from informal discussions with the county manager about concurrency, which is really all I know about it. It seemed like, from what I remember, this has more of there's a lot of things in planning law where it's like, oh, you should do this. And if you don't do it, it's like, well, you should have done it. But this one seemed like it had a lot more teeth to it in the sense that, and maybe you can elaborate on that.
Yes.
Can I take a
if
stab
you
at
want
it?
to.
Because I think I
Yes.
know where you're going.
Mhm.
Is when a development puts in an application, they have to, along with that application, they're gonna say, okay, because we're putting in all these houses, all these trips are gonna go through this intersection, this intersection, this intersection. And based upon those trips, we're gonna do a traffic analysis to make sure that you meet the county's adopted level of service. If they don't, then that'll trigger what Kendra's talking about, and the developer will be responsible for mitigating those impacts.
And when it comes to, if I may, when it comes to looking at those intersections, level of service translates to how much time am I gonna spend in traffic at those intersections?
You're exactly right.
Yes, and it's not only about housing developments, it's also about commercial development. Because where I learned about concurrency might have been prior to you joining the county commissioner, is the build out along Martin Way. Close to, I wanna say, close to Kenwood. Maybe a little farther down, it's where the Winco is.
Kingham.
Yeah, Kingham. And there was a time when we were concerned about concurrency on Martin Way and level of service, and that was preventing the businesses that are there now, a Starbucks, I think there's a Sonic drive-through. All of that was prevented from going in until we solved this question. So whatever kind of development.
And you said, so 2 questions. You said the modeling, is that the developer has to pay for modeling, or we do modeling to show how many more trips will go through the various intersections?
They work with TRPC, and then they provide us the results.
Okay, and then what's my other question? Like, is there a minimum threshold that, like if I'm building a house, I probably don't have to go through a traffic analysis, but how big is it before I have to have this requirement on me as a developer?
They have to do the analysis. Becky, am I wrong? Is it 25
25.
trips?
PM peak hour trips.
PM peak hour trips. So
Yeah.
meaning 25 vehicles leaving that site.
Okay, so maybe a 10 home development or something? Might
The
be-
average is,
That'd be about 25 homes. So on average, just a rule of thumb is that one single family home generates 1 PM peak hour trip.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's like a
So
25
25 home
subdivision.
development or an equivalent commercial
Correct.
thing, and then they'd have to go to TRPC, get this modeling, and if it showed that it was gonna exceed our level of service, I know there's some formula of how you figure that out, then they have to come up with a plan to mitigate. And
Yes.
that could mean that's above and beyond impact fees, or is that what their impact fee is based on, or is it they pay their impact fee, but they might have to do a whole bunch more stuff because they're
Yes.
exceeding level of service?
All of that. So first of all, I just want to speak to state concurrency law. State concurrency law, concurrency doesn't actually care who pays. I mean, to be candid, state, really all the concurrency says is, are you meeting the level of, are you able to achieve the level of service standard when this development is in place? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, do you have the improvements either, constructed, will you have them in place within 6 years? And so whether that's the county doing that, whether that's the developer, again, the state doesn't care. In reality, it's probably a development agreement and your staff is working with the developer to kind of figure out what that is. If it can be done through an impact fee project, all the better. But if not, then that probably, I would imagine, sits on the developer to make those improvements.
I seem to remember with the Martin Way project Martin Way, yeah, that we determined an amount of money that they would each contribute to get us to where we needed to be.
Yep, that's fairly
Yeah.
common.
Commissioner Edwards, anything before we move on?
The only question I'd have is, what about when money is raised in one area, it has to be spent in that area, or where's the boundaries of where it would be spent?
Success. So you're exactly right. You were paying attention in our impact fee presentations. Those impact fees are collected for certain areas and do have to be spent within, I believe there's 6 areas in the county. So
It's kind of
There's a
like,
formula though. It's not just you're located here and all of them get spent. We've done some modeling manipulations to understand how development in one part of the county impacts others. So the funding is then distributed into those sub areas based on that analysis.
so for example, if a development happened in South County, I'm just guessing, that those folks are going to Olympia for a lot of stuff, school, grocery store, entertainment, or whatever, so it's okay to spend some piece in Olympia to mitigate that impact, even though the development's down in, Bucota.
Correct.
Okay.
And we've done kind of all of that is established through your impact fee program right now.
Does that cover you, Commissioner Edwards?
Yes, that does it. I guess the example of maybe Bucota, maybe that doesn't work quite as well. The only reason I say that, most of those people go down to Centralia.
Absolutely, but they've got it all modeled out. I've seen
Correct.
they figured it out,
do.
like who goes where. Nobody's driving out to Steamboat Island, fortunately, in my district. But downtown Olympia, downtown Centralia, all of that. Anyway, go ahead, guys.
Perfect.
proud of you, Commissioner.
All right, well, that gets us through the terms. I'm gonna keep going on. I'll probably go the wrong direction, but we'll see. But yep, I will go the wrong direction, guaranteed. Okay, so at the beginning of this process, so this process actually started last year. We've been working closely with staff. First of all, before we come up with a new level of service policy and approach to concurrency, it was really important that we were really kind of hitting some of the objectives that staff had. One, they wanted the new program to be based on sound planning. So right now, there was a feeling that the current kind of level of service concurrency program was just too reactive. Sometimes projects were coming in, they were necessitating improvements that weren't expected. And so we wanted to develop a program that's, kind of tied to some sound modeling so that there's some more predictability. Second, really important to maintain a program that, still has that ability for transportation impacts to be identified and mechanisms for those impacts to be addressed such that a development moratorium is not required. Essentially, it's just I think this is pretty complicated way of putting it, but is it clear who's putting the impact there? Is it clear a path towards addressing impacts? Is that something that we can all agree on and move forward with? So just, a really user-friendly way for county staff and developers to really, everyone just be really clarified about what's going on, such that appropriate solutions can be identified and move forward with. And we'll talk a little bit about your current concurrency program, your current level of service policy. There are some very confusing mechanisms in it that has led to sometimes some confusion between developers and the county in terms of the types of improvements that are needed. And so we've tried to really simplify the level of service policy such that the analysis steps are much simpler, so it's a little more obvious. Do we need a signal here? Do we need a roundabout here? Is there a turn lane required? What is that appropriate improvement? So through streamlining some of the analysis, we've made kind of those sorts of solutions easier to identify. Supports multimodal projects. So one of the things I do want to say, an update this year at the state level, there's a lot of legislation that of course impacted transportation. One of the important ones is that your concurrency system should be supporting multimodal projects. And that's something that is important at the state level, and kind of the system that we're going to talk about today. We think it's aligned with that, but in a more rural context. Because again, level of service policy is what we're talking about in this location, in this venue, is unincorporated Thurston County. So fairly kind of rural flavor to it. Context sensitivity. So we wanted to make sure that we were tailoring the system to kind of the geographic diversity of the county. And then last but not least, I already kind of hit on this a little bit, just a really understandable system that's easy for county staff, commissioners, whoever it is, to communicate kind of how it works to the public. So with that, keep going on. So talk first, always really important to me, just to really make sure that we understand the patient, understand what your system is today. So in terms of the system that you have right now, some aspects of it. First of all, it's based on a PM peak hour 2-hour period. So that, just to share, that has led to some confusion. Most transportation engineering analysis that occurs either occurs at a daily level or it occurs at a 1-hour level. So having a PM peak hour 2-hour threshold has led to some confusion. Just typical methodologies, all of the kind of technical tools that are at most the disposal of most transportation firms, most developers, et cetera, is all based on a 1-hour. So that's something that we were looking to improve. It's based on intersection level of service. We're not looking to change that. Intersections are really, when you have congestion, that's where it shows up first. Intersections are the pinch points in your system. So we're kind of looking to maintain that. Thirdly,
What was the second? I'm sorry, what did you just say?
it's based on the intersection level of service. So how much delay is experienced at intersections. The third point is just that within your urban growth areas, level of service standards generally D. So you can see on the table that's on the screen here what that means. At your unsignalized, so stop controlled intersections, in general, someone coming to a stop sign can't wait any more than 35 seconds for that to be considered acceptable operations. And if it's a roundabout location or a signal location, they can't wait any more than 55 seconds. So that's kind of the way that it works in your UGA today, except for Yelm, which Yelm has its own standards, which are a little bit more strict for some of it. But they have a pretty complicated standard there. And then outside of the urban growth areas, the level of service standard is C. So that really does ratchet down the amount of delay that is considered acceptable before you have to program an improvement. So that means at a stop sign, someone can wait no more than 25 seconds. And if they're waiting 25 seconds, you need to be programming an improvement. And if they're at a signal or a roundabout, they can wait no more than 35 seconds. So it's a pretty conservative standard that you have today that leads to a very large capital list.
On that topic, could I,
Yeah, go ahead.
who sets those rules, I guess? And the reason like Yelm's got different ones maybe than Lacey has, or Rainier. So is it based on population, or is there a standard, matrix that they go by? Or do they just decide, well, we don't want people to wait, so 10 seconds is the rule here, it might be 30 seconds elsewhere? How does that work?
So there's the manual called the Highway Capacity Manual that is basically, it standardized the amount of delay associated with each letter grade. But then agencies can choose to adopt their own if they don't want to.
So they're just a suggestion, they aren't a mandate.
I would say that's true, yes. I hope I said that.
From my standpoint, you answered that perfectly. What I would say is these level of service standards that we see here that are in place for the county, pretty typical. I would suspect these were developed soon after the Growth Management Act was adopted, so probably in the mid-1990s. The county has updated its comprehensive plan a couple of times since. And so, you know, I would say that what's in place was fairly state of the practice. And what I would say in terms of Yelm, and that might be what's more begging the question for you, why is it so different? I suspect that that was some plan that was adopted for Yelm. The fact that the downtown, there's level of service F for the urban core in Yelm that suggested that there was a desire not to maybe widen the main street at all, to maintain kind of an urban form there.
Like Meridian's got quite a new development going out there. I know, it looks like it's at least a 40-acre piece, I suppose. So how does that work with Lacey? If we don't put the right restrictions in place, Lacey disagrees, no, that's gonna be more of an impact for us. Is there an appellate process to solve that through mitigation, maybe in front of the hearings examiner or the?
And that's what you're speaking to, is coordinated through the joint plans with each individual city. So generally, there'll be some consensus in that joint plan that, hey, this is acceptable to the city.
But if it's not, then what? I mean, I'm just curious.
I haven't got there yet, I don't
Oh,
know.
okay, so you try to get it all along. Well, where I'm going is, I just got out of a meeting with Lacey, and we're talking about, you know, should they be, or could they be involved in UGA planning, permitting, whatever, you know, so for consistency. And I'm just trying to figure out how that all plays in. It looks like things outside of their jurisdiction can certainly have impact within their jurisdiction. And that would probably apply to the UGA area as well, so it might be beneficial to make sure that we meet their needs, so we don't have a rub. I don't know what that rub would be, don't know the legal process, but I would guess it could be a rub.
Could be. And like I said, I think that's specifically why we do joint plans. Part of the reason, obviously, that we do joint plans with each individual jurisdiction.
If I may, I would just add in that that's one of the requirements for comprehensive plans, is that there's kind of 5, primary requirements for transportation elements. One of them is that it's coordinated planning with other jurisdictions. And the reason for that, and I think as you've noted, is that transportation is like water. It flows out of the jurisdiction. So somebody gets in their car and they can go wherever they want, and vice versa. So there is an expectation that there's some level of joint planning going on.
And I guess I'll just follow up on something Commissioner Menzer said earlier today, and this was, well, are some of them mandated, but some of them are kind of, oh, well, kind of a thing. So if they don't figure it out, is it oh, well, or no, you gotta do it this way?
Gotta do it.
Who's the enforcement?
Huh?
Who's the enforcement on that?
I guess is the penalty, they take your birthday away or state funding, crab
No,
funds?
they wouldn't get a permit,
I don't know,
so I guess it'd be the county in this point.
okay, I'm good.
I had some questions, but I'm looking at, it looks like they're all answered in the next slide, so I'm gonna take a
Okay,
look at
so you'd like me to keep going?
let you go.
Okay, perfect, proposed program. So now I'm gonna talk about kind of some of the proposed changes. One, I already kind of mentioned this. We're looking to move from a 2-hour peak hour, to a 1-hour peak hour. Again, this is just to reflect kind of industry standard and just make your system something that, you know, many are much more familiar with. Yes.
So my question here was, is it just a matter of ease of it being an industry standard, or is there actually a policy difference by choosing the 2-hour versus the 1-hour? What do you get in terms of a different result?
Two things. One, it is ease, so admittedly, and I think something that we've heard from county planners is that a lot of the developers the TIAs are highly inconsistent because no one knows how to use this 2-hour standard. So I think by going to something that's much more industry standard, it's gonna lead to much more standard reviews and things are gonna be done much more consistently. So I think there's some real benefit to that.
But what I'm getting at is, let's say the whole industry said, let's go to 2.
Mhm.
What would be different about that versus everybody doing 1? Does it mean it's more conservative, you know what I mean? Like, does it yield a need for more? Is it less restrictive, or like Commissioner Edwards always saying, is it more restrictive or less restrictive? In the sense of, is it gonna show more need for infrastructure upgrade or less?
So 2 ways of answering your question, and I know where you're going. So from one, if the whole industry was to go to 2, we'd have tools that are available for 2 and we'd all know how to do it. But I think more fundamentally, what your question is if you're spreading a peak over 2 hours, so you're looking at what are conditions between 4 and 6 p.m.
Right.
versus what are conditions from 4:30 to 5:30, are we capturing more of a peak? In theory, yes, going to 1, that might be a little bit more conservative. However, what I would say is you'll see in the subsequent bullets, we've addressed that also through some other updates to your policy.
Okay, and then, okay, great. That's my question on that one.
Okay. Second bullet, we're looking at updating from level of service D to level of service D from C. I'll explain to that a little bit more in the rural areas. And so the idea here is that we felt, you know, it's consensus in looking around at what other counties are doing in recognition of the cost of accommodating and making sure you've got level of service C operations every single intersection versus level of service D. That leads to a much more reasonable capital list. And we'll get into that in some mapping that we're gonna show in a bit. But, you know, what is the actual implication of that? Is that instead of saying that, hey, we can't have someone wait at a stop sign for more than 25 seconds, we're now saying, okay, maybe we can have them wait for a little bit longer, and it's not gonna necessitate kind of the upgrade to a signal or an upgrade to the roundabout quite as quickly.
And my question was gonna be, is that unusual? Because it struck me as unusual to have rural at a higher than urban, because, and I hadn't thought about what you said about maybe Yelm's trying to keep the streets small or something, but setting aside that question, those times are by intersection, not by area. So if I'm in an urban area, I'm gonna hit 10 times as many intersections. So why am I being forced to wait longer at each one? Because that's gonna be multiplied by like 10. And in a rural area, it's gonna be like 1/10 of the number of intersections. So waiting an extra 20 seconds would seem to be way more acceptable than it would be in an urban area. Of course, you have, in a big area, you have public transit and things like that. And we're in that middle ground where people tend to drive more in Thurston County than hopefully they will in the future. But I don't know, it caught my attention because,
Could I add on to that?
yeah.
Well, how does that affect the carbon footprint then? Cars idling for longer periods of time and all that?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's gonna be more if you're, you have more cars waiting longer at more intersections if
Right,
you
that'd
have
be
a
detrimental.
lower level of service in the urban growth area than you do in the rural.
So I'll first
So
answer
when you make
your
it easier to
basic
drive,
question
then
that
you're,
it feels counterintuitive.
yeah,
This is actually very typical. And why? In an rural setting, you're expecting to wait less. And so I think that's, generally, first of all, there's lower traffic volumes. So we don't experience as much congestion. So we can get away with sometimes setting a higher level of service threshold. The other is just when you're in a rural area, you're not expecting to be waiting maybe necessarily at a stop sign quite as long. So that's the reason why sometimes the rural setting is a little higher than an urban standard. But level of service C is something that almost all of the agencies that I've seen in the state are moving away from because it is just a very costly standard to uphold. And I think that's in talking to county staff and looking at your capital plans, we're starting to see there's a lot of projects that are just being driven by a calculation and a computer model that may not actually in reality make sense to construct.
How about, why wouldn't you utilize yield signs more often to offset sometimes, especially in rural areas where kinetic energy from a dead stop going burns up a lot more fuel, sitting there idling burns fuel. Why not yield signs if we're gonna try to improve traffic flow and save the environment at the same time?
Karen, I don't want to jump in. I've seen you wanting to add
No,
something
no, that's
earlier.
okay.
Okay.
The only point I wanted to make on this too is keeping in mind that our prior plan and the proposed plan or program that we're at now, keeping in mind the population growth that we've had in an area, right? And as more population grows in an area, you're gonna have more cars on the roads, and therefore you're gonna have to look at your level of standard on those in those increments to see what makes sense, right?
Like over,
It's not
I'm gonna use
often,
Four
but-
Corners on Bald Hills Road. That's a great intersection that you guys did that, cars aren't backed up there like they used to be because of those, four yield abilities, really makes a difference on getting the traffic flow through there. And I think it addresses everything I've said about the carbon footprint, about delay, about better movement of traffic. So why isn't there more of that?
Because because the movement that always drives concurrency is the left-hand turn.
The restriction, you mean, that might, right? Isn't that the difficult thing, is the left-hand
The
turn?
left-hand turn.
Yeah.
And by improving the right, you're not addressing the lefts. So you still have all that delay with that left-hand turn movement. That's why you're not seeing more.
Well, what I would say to the commissioner's question here, this level of service standard isn't gonna tell you what your solutions are gonna be. So, if we were to, evaluate a project and it's got yield signs, we can program that all into the model and look at what the delay is. Roundabouts also can get, obviously stop, everyone having to stop, and you're able to kind of roll into that. So I would say I appreciate those ideas, and those are more ideas that I think would be appropriate in talking about the capital projects, the capital list. That actually isn't an answer that concurrency necessarily answers, or what your level of service standard answers. But I think those are good and very valid points from a capital standpoint, and I agree with much of
which
what you
solution
said.
to use to get to the level of service?
You mentioned we're going to change, several times you've said, we're gonna change, to a certain delay. or-
Proposed, Commissioner.
We're
it says
recommending,
proposed.
sorry,
Yeah, oh, I know,
recommendations.
and does that come to us, you make us a recommendation like speed limits? You make a recommendation to us, so when the public comes in and says, why do you do that? We can't say, Matt said. Matt did it, I didn't do it.
Absolutely.
It'll be part of the comp plan for your approval.
Okay, so then we end up buying off on it at some point.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Okay, good enough.
Matt said.
yeah, can we say that Matt did the wireless code?
Would you approve it faster if he did?
Yeah.
So the third bullet here is the thing that's probably the biggest change. And it's a recommendation to reevaluate how we consider stop-controlled intersections. So,
A stoplight?
no, not a stoplight. This is actually a stop sign. And I actually have an image
Stop
on the
control.
next screen that will explain kind of what that is. So this is a very technical concept and we had to put a graphic here to talk about it. So currently, when you've got, for example, you got your main street, main road going through, and you have, you know, a small street coming up to it. Often, as you know, the small street has a stop sign and they wait and they don't, you know, the main street traffic just keeps going, it's not stopped. And the road at on the smaller street, they're stopped behind a stop sign until it's safe for them to proceed. So that's right now at a stop controlled intersection, we measure level of service based on how long the vehicle on the side street is waiting to cross. And there's too much of a smile here, I'm a little concerned.
And I mean, I'm just thinking of all the places where it's super hard to get out. And
Yeah.
like- Like trying to get out of Sleater County, or trying to get out of North Thurston High School.
Or the public works lot, that's the worst.
No. But interested, keep going, I'm
Okay.
curious about this.
So here's the proposed. That's leading to just a huge number of projects that are on your capital list. I think it's leading to about 14 additional intersection projects they're quite expensive, that would require a signal or they would require a roundabout. So that's a big component of your capital list. What we have been talking about and what we're recommending, bringing as a proposal for you to consider, is to reevaluate the way that we are measuring delay at those intersections.
I thought it was about driving red cars.
Yes, everybody gets a red car.
Okay.
It is to consider the delay averaged of the entire intersection. So to really kind of recognize the delay on the vehicles on the main street. Because essentially, at the example here, if somebody is waiting 40 seconds at the stop sign, that would currently be completely unacceptable. And so you would have to improve that intersection. But if you are to consider the main road delay, it's going to be a lot lower. Now, it's something that we recognize. What that does is it helps a lot of these really small minor streets from driving your capital list, because that minor street need is driving a huge amount of your capital list. Now, we do recognize, however, that there is a point where that can potentially become unsafe. And what is that situation? When somebody is waiting at a stop sign for so long, they get desperate to leave, and then they jump out and then they're more at,
Guilty.
yeah. And so what we're recommending to consider in your standard is, again, to consider, you know, to measure the delay for these side street stop controlled intersections based on all of the vehicles in the intersection. So again, the average is being pulled down by the main road. However, we would put an upper limit on how much side street delay on average is considered acceptable, and that would be 60 seconds. It's like, all right, if people are waiting on average more than a minute, then we probably need to address that. But right now, it's 25, 30 seconds that's driving that, and
This is during the peak hour,
this is during the peak hour, correct?
has to be.
So
within
not averaged over the day, this is during your busiest time. So again, we are, by going to just 1 hour, peak hour, we are really thinking about what is that busiest time in the county. But we're recognizing that maybe at 25 seconds just seems like a
Are
little
you
too-
saying that the wait time for the people at the stop sign doesn't change, but the if you use those other vehicles on the main
Correct.
thoroughfare, the average becomes
Half,
less?
basically.
Yeah, half or something like that. Is
It
that?
becomes,
So really, it's just a shell game almost. They still have to wait the same length, right?
it
So how does that benefit them?
it benefits them if they're a taxpayer. that they're paying a lot less for some of the improvements that would need to sit in your CIP. But Commissioner, to your question, I do take that seriously. We can't be completely blind to how long they're waiting.
That's why
And
she's
that's
putting
why
the
we have the
cap.
60-second cap.
So if it gets to
There's
60,
a
then
maximum of
Okay.
60 seconds, right?
I'm with
So
you.
to make sure it doesn't get too far. So what we're trying to do is just modulate your level of service policy, quite honestly, to get to something that is more affordable within kind of a countywide context. And at the same point, uses methodologies that any transportation engineer that, you know, your developers are using or the county may use are familiar with
Does
using
it
as well.
factor in how many cars are coming down the side streets? Like if it's just
Yes.
okay,
Yes,
so that goes into the average somehow.
that goes into the average, yes.
How many cars are having to wait? Cause it could be, it could be 2 minutes or 5 minutes, but it happens once a day, cause it's just and that wouldn't force us to have to go spend millions of dollars on a traffic upgrade for the one car that comes down that road, right?
And that probably.
Because it's a really hard place to get out.
Yeah, but we do have the 60-second cap on there. So the 60-second cap is really for that delay, that side street approach. We wouldn't want them to be waiting any more than a minute. At that point, we would be looking at if there are improvements in place. Right now, if they're waiting any more than 25 seconds, you're having to put improvements in place there.
But what I'm saying is, in your graphic, those side streets, you know, obviously there's a main street, but the cross street could be a significant street,
Correct.
or it could be almost no traffic. And
Correct.
there's no difference for that, I mean, in terms of, it's just average number of weight of however many cars. Do you understand what my question?
I do understand your question.
Like if
So-
it's 100 cars waiting 45 seconds or one car waiting 3 minutes,
Mhm.
like, those should not be prioritized equally, in my opinion.
I agree with you. So in the case of the 100 cars waiting 45 seconds, if it's a much more balanced flow, so you've got, you know, a lot of people on that side street and a lot of people on the main, but they're much close, that's gonna drive up that average delay a lot. And we see that delays at side street stop control intersections, so at a stop
Because
sign
there's a
grow
backup?
Yeah, because
exponentially.
there's so many cars that are waiting, the
So it'll
delay is gonna
naturally get
start, yeah, it's naturally
accumulated in
gonna
the
go
average, is
higher.
what you're saying.
Yes,
So one car
Because
might
more and more
wait
people are
45
waiting, so
seconds
it's-
or
I guess
25 seconds,
my,
but the one behind him has to wait 50 seconds, say.
Correct.
so in my hypothetical though, you would only see that if there was enough to create a backup. Cause if it was just one car, waited a long time, then the next car, waited a long time, then the next car, waited a long time, then the next car.
Yes.
Versus another intersection where it's just one car,
Sliding.
wait a long time, that's the only one for the whole hour. Those would be treated the same. Because the average wouldn't be ratcheted up because for any given car, it's exactly the same as the one.
Yes, the average
You're
delay.
only
is-
gonna factor up the average if it's creating a backlog, which probably is most of the
It
time.
probably is in
My,
the peak
my
hour.
concern's probably a very small one, but I was just trying to see how you're figuring this out.
yeah, you're
I think I get
correct,
it.
they would be the same in that case.
But yes, the growth is exponential. So the way that the programs work, Synchro is kind of the industry software. It's actually quite responsive to the situation that you're.
And
bringing
wouldn't
up.
the 1 hour time frame actually help that? Because you capture the
Yes.
time where there's the
Yes,
backlogs are happening,
absolutely.
not being
Yes.
watered down by
The 2
the
hour.
other hour where it's
Correct.
probably no backlog.
Yes.
So that's kind of another advantage to the.
But wouldn't a yield sign even be better because there's absolutely no time accumulated towards the average? Possibly, if they time it right, they just roll right on.
Isn't it really a yield, Commissioner? Busy street, if you see an opening, go.
I think we're gonna have to have another discussion on yield signs. at some
Yeah.
point.
For right
You don't want
turns,
me to
maybe,
touch
right? Not left.
Roundabouts are just the same. So
Interesting, that's
okay.
good stuff.
I think we've got this pretty well. Oh goodness. I don't think I need to go into this too much. Always stop signals, roundabouts, no change from what you're doing proposed, so I'm not gonna dwell on that. Okay, so we have 3 more maps that I'm gonna show you. And I actually wanna, we're gonna have to use our brains to kind of combine a few of the maps, and I apologize for that. But, so first of all, just to show you, we've analyzed a lot. So all the dots on this map are all of the intersections that we've evaluated this policy under. So there's a lot. I think there's like 80 intersections here that are shown.
These were strategically chosen to try to give the system a good test.
Yes.
Meaning the proposed changes?
Yeah.
So we evaluated them and we evaluated them in 2045. So if you recall, sound planning, understanding where your growth is. So that's
In 2045, you said.
2045. That's the horizon year of your comprehensive plan.
Oh, okay, that's what you're planning for, is 2045.
Future. yeah,
Yes. So we've considered all the growth that's expected on your streets based on growth in housing and, you know, employment over that time. The modeling also considers growth outside of the county that would be using county facilities, that kind of stuff. Oh my gosh, here we go. Okay, so these are the intersections that would fail under both under the proposed standard and the current standard. So these are a subset of the intersections that would fail under your current standard. And I'm just gonna quickly switch to this. And this is where I'm a little embarrassed, or this map should be better. You see all the yellow dots here? There are 14 intersections that are flagged here, and there are 14 intersections that are flagged here. So unfortunately, and I'd love to, you know, we'll talk to the county or staff, if there's any way we can provide this other map to you. Essentially, under your current standard, there are 28 intersections that are failing. So it's all the locations on this map and this map. What this was trying to show you is under the new policy that we're proposing. So again, revising level of service standard to D, revising how we're looking at delay times. We only have about 14 projects that need to be on your capital list that are being driven by concurrency. With the current policy that's in place today, there's an additional 14 locations.
The new policy basically solves these yellow ones.
Correct, correct.
And we still have the red set.
I'm glad you guys were able to.
It diminishes
yeah,
the
get
list
that.
by
Like
half.
at Vale and 507, I think it is, which you don't show right now, but you did on the failing
Mhm.
one earlier. And
Yes.
that one, isn't that scheduled to have a roundabout put in there already? So it's got a solution built in, isn't it?
That's a state intersection.
Yeah, it is the state intersection.
So yes, there is a roundabout.
It's planned there for pretty darn quick, isn't it?
So that's under negotiation with the state right now. But, so we're supposed to be done with right away or let's put it this way, we're supposed to be to construction in 2026.
Well, that's great. So that's a solution that would be addressed.
Okay, and then I'll just ask you about another one because I see it up there as a fail. And that'd be Vale and 148. And I think that fails, doesn't it fail more out of stupid and some other causation? Maybe it's alcohol, because I know there's a fair amount of accidents there, but it's a pretty open intersection. So what's the deal? Are we considering the reason behind, and is it accident driven, I take it?
No, this is,
based on traffic volumes
Traffic
that are
volumes.
estimated.
Yeah, there's a,
but you gotta remember that these are traffic volumes that are projected in the future. So the land use out there is probably driving a lot of the anticipated
Yep.
traffic.
but it's an unusual intersection because it's got a thoroughfare and then it's got a heavily used 148th that has a stop sign. But it's got a continuation of 148th that dead ends over here. And so it gets very little traffic. So there's like almost never a left-hand turn coming out of that part of 148. So I guess I'm curious why it would be included to be comparable, kind of like the failure one down by McKenna. That's kind of a, you know, you just can't get out there almost. So I'm just using those two because I'm pretty familiar with them.
Their side street stop, we've got, I think, a fair amount of development occurring somewhere, probably off of
Not
148.
anymore down on 148, that's what I'm saying. It's developed out already, It's not gonna be developed anymore, so even in 2045, it's gonna be roughly the same. Where coming from the other direction, there's a fair amount of development that goes on. So I just wonder if that doesn't give us a false sense of need. Because there would be, you're thinking there'd be future development when there's not gonna be future development on that dead end. As far as I know, there's no intention of making that a thoroughfare over to 153rd, or at least a complete right-of-way for the county to use.
Let us follow up with you on that one. That's why we're doing this, right? To look at these different situations.
Okay.
Can I ask on my, so in my district, or my new district, I'm confused by the two maps, cause it looks like one of them's the same. I'm looking at 29 and 30, which is like Evergreen Parkway in Harrison, Delphi and Harrison, but then you look at the other map,
Mhm.
there's another one identified.
Yeah.
And how is that a different one?
Are you 29 and 30? I'd have to look at those.
Cause you
and
said
see if I can-
these maps are not any overlap.
So the
Yes.
red is 28 and 30,
Okay, and then what's 29?
and then 29 is on the yellow.
So can you tell me what 28, 29, and 30 are?
28, is that Delphi?
It's mud, but
They all look like they're in the exact same spot for the most
I
part.
think those are gonna be the parkway ramps.
One's Parkway and Harrison, one's Delphi and Harrison, then what's 28, what's 29 on the other map?
Just trying to see if I can find this for us.
It's possible the two ramps are coming in as
Mhm.
two different
I think
intersections.
that's the case.
So you have
Oh, cause you had, when you
Ramp
had your
and then
open
on
house,
ramp.
you had both sides.
there's two
One's
different,
failing and one's not?
Mhm.
Okay.
So I can explain that. So we've got 28 is Delphi and Mud Bay. 29 is Evergreen Parkway southbound off-ramp, US 101 southbound on-ramp and Mud Bay Road. And then 30 is US 101 northbound off-ramp, Evergreen Bay Parkway northwest, or northwest northbound off-ramp, on-ramp, and Mud Bay. I mean, that's just such a complicated, so there's 3 points right in that area.
Now,
There.
I think you've actually, I've heard you talk about taking a left off of the off ramps from, or going across all those lanes. I think we've had that discussion
Yeah.
with you.
I mean, the Delphi one, I'm surprised, cause there's a light there.
Right.
And so I'm really surprised that, the one on the far west, 28. But 29, 30, you guys were working on
right?
a thing, and, you know, and then you took public comment on what would you prefer, two roundabouts or lights, whatever. So I know that one's, I didn't realize you were breaking it into two.
Yeah. One project, two intersections.
All right, well, that tells me what I need to know. This is good, thank you, guys. I know we're getting close to time, 2 or 3 minutes. Anything else, Commissioner Edwards?
No, I'm good, thanks.
We owe you an answer on Vale and 148.
You can just
That
look
was
at it,
it?
see what you
It's good.
think. I'm gonna go
Okay.
with you guys.
I was just gonna say really quick though, Commissioner Edwards, earlier you said that if they wanted, they could set the level of service at 10 seconds. And so that no one ever had to wait. But you can imagine what the project list for that would look like. Like
Yeah,
all of our intersections.
It'd have
would
to be a
need-
double wide roundabout or
So this
Freeways through all.
So this practice is really trying to get our list down to an achievable list that we can plan for and successfully plan for.
Not only
and
that, but it would
deliver.
impact fee costs,
Yep.
development costs, right? Like you can't support it through the funding that we have if we set too high of a level of service, because the money to
Are
construct
one
all
of
that
the
needs to come from
drivers
someone.
towards accomplishing your mission, is it risk with, say, the risk management people? Those folks that are carrying our insurance policy wanna make sure we're getting it right. I don't know, do they ever scrutinize any of this, or do they just strictly go by claims? You know, maybe don't even know the
Never.
answer.
I think from like a safety standpoint, you're talking about. versus
Yeah,
manual.
and what we're faced with liability, so, you know, with the
It's a
county.
claim-based.
It'd be individual
Yeah.
claims.
I think it's interesting to me, and I think Thurston County is probably not quite there, but there's a certain level of urban development to where you want to start investing in public transit and you want to stop like you want to stop enhancing the infrastructure, you know, in an urban core. You know, because like you say, it ruins the like downtown Yelm, or ruins the character of the downtown. It, you know, interferes with efforts to do, you know, subways or bus rapid transit systems and stuff,
And
all of that.
what you're describing is called a strategy corridor. So like Martin Way is now a strategy corridor, because if you keep adding, you can keep adding and adding, you're never gonna get to where you need to be. And all you're doing by adding and adding is taking stores away and
Yeah, and they wanted, the vision for Martin Way was pedestrian friendly, being able to have storefronts more on the road, not big parking lots, and then the stores are way back there. That's ugly, and it's practical, but have the parking in the back if you're gonna have it at all.
Right.
Cause it's aesthetically displeasing, and it doesn't make you feel like it's walkable or safe to walk. So yeah, I mean, there's so many considerations, and this is just one, right? I mean,
Yep.
this is just looking at people's transportation convenience. Okay, that's important, but so are a bunch of other things.
Being we're talking about Grand Mound a little bit, can you flip your slides from just the two slides there, the yellow and the red? So
Wow.
I'm curious why there isn't any more red in Grand Mound, actually, because there's a couple places down there that are questionable, but maybe they're kind of being addressed. We've got a roundabout down there. We've got that thoroughfare on Sargent gonna connect up.
so we got.
You've already got a
1, 2,
plan?
3 We got 3 roundabouts planned for the Grand Mound area.
So we don't have to worry about it.
Correct.
Okay, good enough.
Okay, with that, we're adjourned. Good job.
Thank you.